Welcome to the Hauenstein Center's new online program, Lunch and Learn. I'm your host, Gleaves Whitney. During our quarantine, we may not be able to journey beyond our homes, but that should not stop us from journeying beyond our minds. Today's journey takes us from the war zone to one's home, and our guide through that often tough transition is Dr. Michael Ryan. Dr. Ryan earned his PhD in psychology from Colorado State University, and he will help us understand what folks who suffer from post-traumatic stress are going through during this unprecedented time in our nation's history. Many of our veterans are struggling with anxiety and depression, and Dr. Ryan will offer some tips about what they can do to cope with the stay-home orders that are virtually in place in every state in the union now. Dr. Ryan has more than 4 decades of clinical experience as a practicing psychologist working with children and adults. This makes him a really good guide today. His background in neuropsychology helps him understand the neurology, the biology behind anxiety and depression. My conversation with my good friend Michael will go about 30 minutes, followed by questions from our viewers. Our goal is to keep the program under 45 minutes, so feel free to begin sending your questions to us right away using the Zoom toolbar to do so. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Ryan.
I always have fun talking to you, Gleaves.
Thank you. Well, our first responders, medical personnel in emergency rooms, and others on the front lines of our war against COVID-19 more prone to developing post-traumatic stress, you think? And what are the signs we should be looking for?
Absolutely, Gleaves. Because of this crisis, the nature of this crisis, the severity and how long it is, and also the not knowing, it really produces a very traumatic situation for our doctors, our police, our first responders, and all medical personnel. And as you know, our police in Detroit have, many of them have come down with the illness. Many doctors and medical people in New York City have come down and died. It's just a terrible situation. And the prolonged stress of seeing people die, of being helpless as you're trying to help people, and the danger to yourself and perhaps your family has a huge impact on our neurology. And I think it's made worse by our lack of being prepared with the proper equipment, not really having the knowledge we need to know how to fight this thing. It just makes it very, very difficult. And I think what we will find is some people will respond pretty quickly with symptoms, and then others, it may be a year or 2 down the road that they start demonstrating the symptoms of PTS. And what we ought to look for are the symptoms of, first, vigilance, being very anxious and watching and scanning the environment for dangers, for things that could happen, could go wrong. Is the first one. Avoiding things that remind you of this period and and then the third symptom, which is important, is re-experiencing aspects of it. Having flashbacks, hearing voices. No, I'm kidding. But having flashbacks, remembering situations, things that have happened, having things in your environment trigger those memories.
Why do our veterans and other people with post-traumatic stress have a harder time specifically with coping with these stay-home orders?
Well, again, for all of us, it's a very stressful time and situation. The unknowns make it very difficult. And if you've suffered from PTS, just being in a stressful situation is likely to trigger it. Also, I think this having to stay in one place not having the freedom to go out and move. For many people with PTS can reenact some of the feelings they had in hunkering down or being stuck in some place as bullets flew or helicopters or bombs came in. Just that feeling of claustrophobia and not being able to move, and that it's dangerous to go out.
So if somebody is suffering from this, or the people around them are noticing that they're suffering from PTS, what recommendations do you have to help them cope with PTS?
Well, I think in terms of dealing with the stress, the first thing that can be helpful actually for all of us is to reframe some of the things the more unhelpful thoughts we so that instead of saying, oh, this is terrible, how am I ever going to make this through, to say something like, well, this is hard, this is tough, but I have a track record of getting through hard times, being able to get through, and I've got support, I've got my family and friends, and we'll work together on this. I find that it's helpful as much as possible to try to keep your daily routine, even though so much has changed. You may not be able to go to the office or the garage or where you work, but if you can keep a certain routine and build in routines for yourself, that can be very helpful. And that structure helps stabilize you and also keeps your mind off of the stress and the worries that can come up. And those are many, and they're particularly exacerbated by the news cycle that's going on. We're bombarded with information about COVID-19 and different estimates of what the death rate's going to be, how contagious it is, how it's spread, and they're so different. They go from estimating we may have death rates of 2 million to 500,000. And so not only are you very anxious about hearing all this, but then it's very confusing, and you don't have a sense that people really know what they're doing. And some people do, some people don't. So if you can limit the amount of time you spend looking at the news, and so maybe a half hour in the morning, a half hour in the evening, but try not to watch or listen to the news maybe 2 hours before your bedtime, because it can interfere with your sleep. And one of the things you want to do is get a very routine sleep schedule if you can. Connecting with others is very important. It's very difficult because sheltering in place order, but now you have platforms like this where you can meet with family and friends, talk to your buddies, and make sure you build that into your routines. I suggested to you that we have lunch together. That's something we do about once a month. I haven't done it in a couple of months because of all this. And so just sit down using Zoom, order out some good possible, make some, but just those kinds of contacts on a regular basis are very important.
Well, a lot of folks,
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, helping others is very important. I'll talk a little bit more about some ways to do that, but again, it's difficult to do that. The next thing, I'm sorry for this long list.
Okay.
Have fun. Develop some pleasurable activities with the people you're sheltering in with. Games, video games, exercise as much as you can, get out when you can, go for walks or runs or bicycles in a safe way. And then finally, if you really are feeling overwhelmed, or your family feels like it's just too much for you, reach out and get some therapy and some help. If you've had a therapist in the past, we're more than willing to give you a hand through teletherapy at this point. If you need to develop a relationship, it's not ideal, but I'm surprised how well it works. And I'm kind of old school because I'm old. So I've been a little hesitant about all this telemedicine kind of thing. But I had to move to it in my practice, and it's not perfect, but it really can help. So go ahead.
Yes. Well, I think this is really interesting. All the different scenarios you put out there for the different situations people encounter who have post-traumatic stress. Well, a lot of them are in very significant relationship goals. It seems to be need to be supportive and understanding of each other. Go a little bit deeper on how, say, the married partner of somebody who's suffering from PTS can be supportive and understanding.
Well, it's a real blessing to have a partner in this situation. And there are some times where you really come together and it's good. And then I think for all of us, there are times when we think seriously about ways to kill our partner, because of the stress and the difficulty. So give yourself permission to have both. Feel very lucky, but also feel very frustrated. Talking and connecting is very important. And when you're talking about difficult things or things that are frustrating you, it's important to use the old thing of I statements. Begin your statements with, I feel like this when you do that. So you own the feeling instead of saying something like, you make me feel really dumb, or you make me feel really small. Keep it about you, but do communicate your feelings. I think it's important to thoughtfully, in a relationship, plan for some times to be alone, where you just go to different rooms, or one of you goes for a walk and the other, reads a book, and it's just your alone time, and then some together times too. Maybe planning every day a date, whatever works for you, from 20 minutes of going for a walk together, or playing a chess game or something, to watching a movie or that kind of thing. But a time when you're really together, and maybe schedule some times where you can talk about how things are going. And then probably the next most important thing is just to have fun together. In this stress and the worry, we can lose our capacity to have fun and enjoy each other. And that's kind of like the medicine, if you will, to help us keep going. So that if you can plan activities together, plan in different, your spouse or your partner, or with your kids. If you have kids, again, that's another stress, but pull out, play with your kids. It can pull you out of a lot of your worrying and so forth. I think it's easy for us to think, well, we've got to play the way they want to play. And it's good to do that. But, teach them some things you enjoy to do. If you've got an old Nintendo in the basement with Super Mario Brothers or something like that, pull that out and teach them how to do that. If you're going to enjoy that, and it's going to take you to a happier place where you didn't have this kind of stress.
Well, from what you've been saying, the internet plays a huge role nowadays. Zoom, Facebook, Skype, other platforms are helpful. But what do you do when you encounter somebody who is old school and they've been reluctant to have a Facebook account or tackle the technology involved with Zoom, which is actually quite simple, but still, they're old school? How do you get them to cross that, to make that passage?
It's a really good question. I think, if possible, to have an identified technology person in the house, which is usually your child, because our kids know much more about this stuff than we do. But even, to have a friend, even us old guys, usually a friend who got interested in computers and technology years ago, and they're used to helping people. So you get on the phone and have them talk you through how to use Zoom, how to set it up. Is good. If there's a real fear or just a kind of a hatred of technology, sometimes I think you can use the family to get them used to it. So as a family or as a couple, sit down and, Zoom with the person's sister or their mother or something. So they're not really doing it for themselves, they're doing it for you and the family, but it gets them used to seeing it. And, it's really kind of fun. So.
Well, absolutely. And COVID-19 has been so disruptive, and some people, I don't think you even have to have post-traumatic stress to go through this. Some people don't do well with disruption. They like their routine, and all of a sudden, now they have to come up with different routine than what they've been used to for maybe many years. Again, another passage, another transition. How do we encourage people who are just so frustrated at having to adopt a new routine? Because as you point out, routines are important for coping with the shut-in situation if you have post-traumatic stress. How do they make that transition?
Well, again, helping them try to set up a routine that's as close as possible to their old routine. So if all of a sudden they're working from home, starting their work at the same time, wear pants. It sounds weird, but it's easy when you're home just to do the sweatpants or the t-shirt. And sometimes that's good, but maybe when you're going to work, so to speak, you get a little dressed up. So that's because that's part of your routine, and it gives you more of a sense of stability. Also, if you can develop some rituals, either rituals bothered from your faith background, programs, or your faith background, or your your ancestry, kind of your family tradition and so forth, or develop some rituals yourself that are important to you. Maybe a phone call to your aunt every Sunday night. A time in the day when you color. I've got a number of friends who've found that coloring is very soothing, and it kind of helps break that chain of worrying that can occur. So those routines or even rituals can be really helpful.
I'm just curious, your comment about coloring makes me wonder, since you've worked with children so much, do children use coloring books to soothe themselves?
I think so. They and definitely use play not only to soothe themselves, but to work things out. So work out conflicts. So play is a very important medium for kids, but even as adults, it's really helps us soothe ourselves. It's a way of connecting, enjoying the people we love and are with. So, and it's one of the hard things about this period is we're cut off from the people we usually play with.
Well, Michael, that leads to another question. You and I, going way back, have talked about this. Sometimes when you're really struggling with depression and anxiety, the best thing you can do is go out and help others. But of course, in a shut-in situation, a stay home and shelter situation, that's hard to do. You've mentioned, a minute ago, you mentioned call your aunt, reach out, do a sort of maybe a virtual cocktail hour or a virtual dinner with another couple, that kind of thing. anything else that you would recommend that people can do from home to help others and check in on others and get kind of out of their own zone of depression and anxiety?
Well, one of the things I've been aware of, and well, first of all, I'm lucky enough to live in a neighborhood, but it seems like my neighborhood has kind of come together. It's been an opportunity, as painful as it is, for us to get to know each other a little better, to check on each other. I mean, we're 6 feet apart, but we stick our heads out and say hello and how you doing and do you need anything? If there's somebody in your neighborhood who's older and might need their walk shoveled or something, that's something you can do. There is a website called let me see, Nextdoor. And if you Google Door, you'll get it, which kind of connects neighborhoods. Oftentimes a neighborhood, might put out a notice. For a while, I think it was 7 o'clock, we were sticking our heads out and waving at our neighbors. That's really helpful. But more importantly, they've got a program where you can sign up to be a neighborhood helper. I forget exactly what they call it. But then there's a map of all the different neighborhoods, and people who need something, need groceries or a tree removed or something, can identify possible helpers. And just that sense of community and that we're in this together, I think really is very helpful for people.
Well, Michael, in addition to your professional training, you've dedicated your life to music. I mean, going back to college, you and I used to play guitar together, and you'd play the mandolin, and I'd get on the dulcimer. I mean, that's a wonderful thing to do. But you're really good, and you're also a luthier. You make these stringed musical instruments. And how important do you think music is in the lives of those with PTS?
Well, I hope it's very important, and it's an opportunity for them because it's enriched my life so much and saved my life really at times of stress and depression. And it can be as simple as making sure you listen to your favorite songs, you have some uplifting playlists you listen to regularly. My wife's on Tuesday nights and Friday nights, we have a dance party, and we take turns being the DJ, picking 2 dance songs, and then we get on Zoom and we all dance like idiots. Okay. But the music, enjoying the music is wonderful.
That's great.
Good exercise for those of us that need it. And with my youngest daughter, she's musical. Her husband is a fabulous musician, and now she's got a little baby who we're hoping is a future musician. We have a song of the week. My youngest daughter grew up listening to me play old folk songs and Bob Dylan songs, and we went to a number of Dylan concerts together. And so every week we pick out a song and we work on it, and then we get together. We use Facebook for that, and I'm working on some other technologies that might work better, but we just sing and play and have fun with that. So, I mean, it's one kind of hobby, or what would you say, kind of, thing that you just love, that really can lift your spirits and get your mind off of things. And it might be art, there's just lots. It might be an interest in cars and mechanics, following those passions was the word I was looking for, can really help in this situation.
Oh, I so get that. The music would certainly work in our house, and dancing in particular. I'm surrounded by dancers.
Oh,
Well, let's go.
that's great.
Let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum and quiet. To what extent are techniques like, mindfulness, meditation, and yoga helpful during these times of stress?
They can be very helpful. The research is clear that they're very helpful when these stressful times, and um, they're not a cure for PTSD, but they're very helpful for folks with PTS. And for a couple, they all produce a very deep level of relaxation. And the research seems to show that that relaxation response is really what is very, very therapeutic, to the point of helping us build brain cells that have been destroyed by stress and tension. And then the other thing is that sometimes can help break that chain of worrying and rumination that often occurs. So it helps you relax and helps get your mind off of, the difficult things that are happening now.
I'm really impressed because so much of what you're saying, Michael, is that people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress do not have to go through this experience alone. There are a lot of people who want to help. What resources would you recommend that are available in our communities, especially during these stay-home orders?
Well, I think using veterans associations, the VA, other organizations are set up to help in all sorts of different ways. There's a veterans, West Michigan Veterans Task Force, which is just excellent. And I can get you the telephone numbers and addresses of some of those. The CDC has some information on post-traumatic stress and ways to help. I think there are a number of ways to reach out and find a good therapist if you need that. I think feeling free to use community resources and talking to friends who've been struggling with similar kinds of things. Oftentimes they will know of good counselors or good therapists, or just activities that are just very helpful.
Very good. Well, we've got some questions rolling in, and I certainly hope, let me give a shout out to Jim Hodges down there in Texas. I hope we hear from Jim, Cowboy Jim. He has been one of our star speakers year after year. Let me just say that we've got at the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies at Grand Valley, we've had a post-traumatic stress conference year in and year out, instigated really by Dr. Ryan. Myself, back in about 2008 was our first one. And we call it the Hidden Wounds of War. And Michael, you've presented at so many of those. Jim Hodges has presented at so many of them. So we hope that some of you who've enjoyed those conferences over the years are watching.
And by the way, a great passion to have is being a cowboy.
Absolutely.
I think you're still allowed to get out on the range ride.
Yes, that's exactly right. And he tells the story of how animals can have post-traumatic stress and how he had it coming out of the Vietnam War and how he was able to work with animals. Beautiful stories. And we have all of these. If you go to the Hauenstein Center website, gvsu.edu/HC, and go back into our video archive and our past events, you'll see some of Jim's previous talks, and you'll see Dr. Ryan's too, about this very topic. Well, we're having a number of questions that are coming in, and here's one. This person apparently is a very sensitive soul because they're asking, it's anonymous, writes in and asks, there are good ways to reach out and check in on people, and then there are bad ways to check in on people that you suspect are going through a lot of stress. Name a couple of good ways and a couple of bad ways that we should avoid.
Well, I think just being as open as possible, persistent. I mean, it's easy when people have kind of isolated and are kind of gruff with you, to just to give up and say, well, forget it. Hang in there, but don't be a pest. I mean, say, well, I respect what you're saying, but I want you to know I'm here, and I may give you a call in a couple of weeks just to see how you're doing. I think if the person is willing to do some talking, just listening, being able, not always trying to fix it, but just sometimes listen to what they have to say, is really important. Sometimes if your friend or loved one has a good sense of humor, sending a comic or a video to kind of cheer them up is a way of connecting, but it's not too demanding or threatening. I think in terms of the bad ways, one of the bad ways is, to be too persistent, too pushy. Certainly, to tell the person what they need to do, being very confrontive is not helpful unless you've got a very, very good relationship with the person. But those kinds of things, and this kind of, I know what's best for you, and you're really broken and you need to get help, it's not gonna help, and it's not gonna be accepted well. So.
We have 3 questions that have come in. People are interested in how do we focus on children in the most helpful way. The kids are having to handle all the changes in their whole family's lives. And so what do you recommend for any children who are listening and also their caregivers?
Well, I think let's start with the caregivers, because the adults in the family are kind of the models for the kids. They know something's going on, but they really don't know what. And our level of anxiety, our tension, and our attitude really has a huge effect, probably more than our words. So trying not to be too anxious, trying to be positive, but at the same time being truthful and open with the child, because children they're sharp. They know when you're not being honest with them, so that to let them know that this is a difficult time, we're going through a crisis. Don't have to get into all the details. Just let them know that this is a time when we're many people working together, and we're going to get through this. Is a good message. You don't need to go into the mortality rates or how ages is, things. Don't over talk. Just keep it short and simple, but with a positive attitude. For kids who are watching, what I'd say is a similar kind of thing. This is critical. You're having to give up a lot, as we all are for this, but we're all helping by staying home and helping our parents, helping our loved ones, and it's going to be okay. Things are going to be all right. And oftentimes in a situation, a crisis like this, we learn and societies change in ways that are beneficial. So even though it's going to be tough and we're going to have a hard time rebuilding what's happened, I think we'll come out of this stronger. They have learned some very important things about technology, about each other. And so there may be some good things to come out of this as well.
Is there a danger? Brittany Holmes asks a question. She's also wondering about the health issues involving children as they go through this very stressful time for so many families. And she's essentially wondering, how resilient are children? I mean, parents are going to make mistakes. Siblings are going to be making mistakes dealing with younger children. But how resilient are they?
Children are very resilient. I think one of our errors in my generation is trying to protect them more than we really needed to. I mean, there are kids that grow up in war zones, destitute, kids who grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and they survive and they learn. So, we want to help, and how to say it, I think the key thing there is that the adults and siblings are positive, that you have a sense of cohesion and working together, and this optimistic attitude of it's going to be okay, you're going to be fine, it's going to be hard work, but we're going to make it. And I think the hard times, it's hard to watch kids go through hard times, but I also, over 40 years, I've watched kids who've really struggled and had an opportunity then to see them in later life. Oftentimes they're very strong and they still feel the scars, but it gives them a complexity and a strength that I think is very admirable. And I think in some ways it's much more appealing to me than the ones who just, were straight A students and went through Harvard and everything's just been a, downhill slide for them. People like that, I'm sorry if you're listening, but they seem kind of shallow to me,
Okay, just a couple more questions, Michael. We have somebody, an anonymous writer, who's wondering, what are the things you personally, Dr. Ryan, do in times like this to help keep a routine and just keep your wits about you?
Again, the routine is important. It'd be real easy to sleep in, and stay up late. My biological clock is kind of maybe 10 o'clock to 3 in the morning. But I find that I feel better. If I get up at 7, I try to get to bed at 10, get a good night's sleep. I'm trying to eat very healthy, good meals, and working on things. That's how I always find my work very, very helpful. But then, as you mentioned, Gleaves, music is just, it helps me tremendously. It's a way of, when I start worrying and I'm frustrated that, how can the richest countries in the world not have enough face masks for the medical professionals or their first responders? It's a travesty, and I get all pumped up and stuff. I can sit down and with my guitar and play an old protest song or sing, and it just takes me to a different world, and it just helps me relax and not be so frustrated with that.
I can just do with your music. Well, the last question that we have time for is, how common is traumatic stress in the U.S., and how can people learn more about this PTS, unfortunately, striking us? How can they learn more about it?
Good questions. My memory, and this is a fact, I didn't go back and research, partially because it's been changing quite a bit. It's much more prevalent than we ever thought. I think it's about 3%, but I could be wrong. There is a lot of information. The Department of Defense has quite a bit of information. There's a PTS organization. I can get you the website, which has great information on it. If you want to learn more, going back and listening to some of the programs that the Hallenstein Center has put on is a great way of doing that. And not only looking at PTSD, we've had some very good people come and speak, but also moral injury. What happens it's not, I don't think it's as big a deal in this situation, but in war and combat, there's also a toll that's taken on people's spirituality. And it's a new area, and the Hallenstein Center has been very, very good at bringing in the best people to speak about that. So if you have an interest in that area, that's a great resource.
Allie is putting some things up on the screen right now for people who are seeking extra resources online. She's got a couple of things that she's posted, including our Hallenstein Center videos that you've mentioned, Michael. Well, is there anything else you would like to mention that we haven't covered? You know, some book or article that you think is especially important, or some call to action?
Well, the only call to action I guess I would have is we're really at a turning point. This is a huge crisis, and we can make the choice to be angry and hateful and blame each other and try to seek revenge, or we can choose a positive path. We can choose to work together to support each other, to realize how precious our lives and our time really are, and try to come out of this on the other side stronger, more connected, a stronger society, and one that kind of where we've rearranged our values. We've really examined what's the most important thing. Is it more important the hospital make money or have the supplies their professionals need? Those are important questions that we haven't answered very well at times.
Well, good words to end on, Dr. Michael Ryan. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with our listeners. And now they know why you're such a valued partner with the Hallenstein Center when we host these annual PTS conferences, the Hidden Wounds of War. Well, I will also thank our listeners whom I invite to Zoom in or join us on Facebook at the same time Thursday, when my guest will be Kaylor Sweeney. Kaylor serves in the Michigan Army National Guard and is graduating from our Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy later this month. And he will help us understand what we can do to encourage more students to consider a career in public service, because now is more important than any other time in recent memory that they do so. So till Thursday at 1 p.m., stay tuned and stay well. Thanks for watching.